Alright, you guys, so to start this build, I drew up some patterns. I found some pretty good images from Respawn. They have some of their artwork available and a lot of different angles of BD-1. So these are his legs. And so we're going to start with what I call the top leg. It's almost like his thigh. So it's two pieces of 10mm foam glued together. The top layer has those cutouts, and the bottom layer is solid. Then on top of that is another piece of 10mm foam. You're going to cut out that circle, and then what you're going to do is draw your other circle on top of that, and you're going to bevel the edges of that circle. So there's an example there of two circles pre-cut. You're going to need those same circles for the back of the thigh that connect to the body too. So that top circle just cut out, beveled. Like I said, I cut the edges beveled with a razor. Then I trim it up with the rotary tool. Now the centerpiece is a sheet of 10mm foam, the same thickness as the circle that you cut out. And then I use that piece of pipe there that's sharpened to cut out the center there. So what I did is I just cut that 10mm foam that I cut out of that circle in half, so it would be the same. But you guys can just use a piece of 5mm foam for that circle. It's the same thickness. I just since I already cut it out of the 10 mil, just to save material, I just cut it in half. So cut the rest of the thigh piece out, and I'm using my pen just to go through and mark the edges on the top, and then on the side I mark the edges as well. This is where the bevel will be for the thigh. So like always, I try to trim that best I can with a knife. I'm not trying to cut right on the lines. I'm trying to cut almost to the lines that I marked, so that way I don't cut like too deep or too far, so that when I use my Dremel to sand it smooth, that's when I really focus on getting the sanding drum right to the line, right to the pen line. And it doesn't take much, you can see. That's why cutting it first with your knife is a really good technique, because you can kind of sneak up on the edges. You're not sanding down all that material to the bevel lines. And I do the same thing with that circle. It's almost like a knee joint. That's where his leg bends in the game. So I just use some contact cement as always for big pieces. And so contact cement, if you haven't used it, you brush it onto both sides that you're gluing, and then when they stick together, it glues itself to itself basically. So I stick that in place. I try to glue it on where it looks the best. When you sand both of those pieces separately, it'll never be 100%. So what I did is, after I glued it on, I went through with the Dremel and just kind of cleaned up the edges a little bit. So now that half moon piece is 2mm, and that H shape piece there is 5mm foam. And this chunk here, I believe, is 10mm, if I remember correctly. Everything's marked on the patterns, so that gets cut to shape, and then it also gets a 45-degree cut in the front. So it almost kind of looks like a little Lego piece, one of those half-step Lego pieces. And that will get glued on top of that 5mm piece there. So there I go. That goes on the top there. I kind of always try to pre-draw out where stuff goes on the foam, so that way I know exactly where to glue it. So I try not to get a lot of glue like over glued where you're gonna see it. So putting your pattern piece on there and tracing it is a good way to kind of plan where you're gonna put the glue. So that goes there. This half moon circle goes on top of that. Alright, so this piece is kind of complicated. This piece goes like in between that brown 5mm foam and the base of the leg or the thigh. So I cut out a square, and then you can see I got all these markings on the side here. It's just a lot of angles. So there's a bevel in the front, a bevel in the back, and then the bottom of the back gets a inward bevel too. And then that square in the middle there, that gets cut out too. It's basically a recessed piece. So I cut this out, and then I cut it in half. I trim it so it's a little thinner, and then I just glue it back in the same spot. So then I glue that 10mm detail piece on top of that 5mm piece there. Make sure the sides line up with each other. Then this piece here goes right in the middle here. So now to do these like piston type things, I have these little pieces of plastic here, these little plastic tubes. So I cut those to shape, and I got this scrap foam here. It's almost like, it's like cheaper stuff I buy small at like Walmart. I believe it's pretty much like 1mm foam. It's not as thick as 2mm for sure. So what I do is I just cut these strips different thicknesses, and I wrap them around this pipe, and then I glue these into place. And now for the middle of the leg, I have this chunk of copper pipe. It's probably like a fourth line. It's just some scrap stuff I have laying around. So I draw out these this like bevel in the front there, and I use my like bullet shaped stone Dremel part to get that carved in that shape there. So I do the same thing with that 1mm foam. Just glue some like snakes on there, and then I can stick that in place. And that really kind of gives it that like piston look. So there's the circle for the back. It's the same circle as the front. It has a it has a steeper bevel though. It's more of an angle. It has a smaller circle in the center that it attaches to the body. There's also another part that we'll have to install on that to move the body further away from the leg too. but we'll get to that. So the back of the thigh has this little detail piece. Again, it's that 1mm foam I cut out, and then I'm just using this old stone bit here. It's kind of got like a hollow scoop in the front. It makes really good rivets when you just turn it up to high speed and just like stick it in the foam. So now you have to double this. So there's the second copy. I made them both different colors just so I could keep track of which was which. Plus it was kind of fun to do. So now moving down to the lower leg here. The top of the leg is 10mm foam. It has that cutout. That's that rectangle cutout. Now, I actually messed this up. I pre-made the other side first, and I realized after I was almost done that I forgot there's a 2mm piece that goes in between that tan 5mm and the light gray 10mm foam, and it covers that gap, that rectangle cut in the back. So in the template you'll see that it says a 2mm, 10mm, and a 5mm piece for that. So I think that's right about here is when I realized, when I was trying to fill in this gap, I was like, why I didn't fill in the gap on the other one? And then I realized that that's because I put a piece of 2mm on the back. So anyway, there's just a couple detail pieces. The back of the leg is a really complex piece, and I tried to just do like the main shapes and things that I saw from the pictures, and it ends up looking pretty good. It looks pretty complex, which is kind of the point, but in no way, shape, or form did I get it to look identical to the actual leg. But it kind of sells that look, and you don't really notice. So there's just a lot of detail pieces here I'm gluing in, and I mark out here where this needs to be score cut for more detail. And so now on the top of this leg here, it gets this circle detail here. It's almost like a bearing. Same with the bottom. It's a 10mm piece of foam, and then I cut it out and I bevel it inward, so inside it's beveled, and then I go through and I cut these little steps out of it. So I slice two lines down, and then I come in from the side and just cut through it. And it gives you a pretty interesting little shape there. And that goes on the bottom. You can see I did the score cut and the heat treat method to get those panel lines to pop out, just like I always do with a lot of my stuff. That piece there, it gets beveled. That rectangle piece gets beveled. And then these details, I just used the sanding drum, and I just hit them like straight into the foam, almost to make like another rivet type look. So this piece is rounded on both sides, and that gets glued right there. Now these pieces are going to be for the wires. They're just little rectangle pieces of 10mm foam. It's where the wires will glue into. I use this other bit on my Dremel here, and I go around and make all those little parts, all those little rivets all the way around that circle. And using the same bit, I go through and I just kind of sand these little detail like panel lines in all these pieces on the inside here. So now for the wires, I have this old iPod cable, this white one here. It's an old like iPod Gen 2 or something cable, and it worked really well for this. It's like just thick enough, but you can use any type of old scrap wire that you have. I have a whole bin of like wires that have come off of like old chargers and old stuff that I don't use anymore, and that comes in handy actually. So I glue these in place. I drilled a little tiny hole with that same bit, just so that they had like a little place to sit inside. And then when you glue them inside there, they're pretty much permanent. And I kind of pre-bend these a little bit just so they kind of hold their form. And then this is a thinner piece of like audio wire that I have, and so I just glue that in this corner, and then kind of trace it around this square piece here, and then glue it into that corner. It gives it a little bit more detail down there, and it really sells like that Star Warsy like look. So there's the whole leg together, and now we have to do the feet, which honestly were like the hardest part, I thought, of this build. It was they're all weirdly shaped. I drew these. I basically drew a picture like a Lego diagram to show like how to break the pieces of the feet down, just for me to like understand, to make the patterns and everything. So basically, if you follow the patterns, it's not as bad as like trying to figure it out without patterns. So the bottom of the foot here is what I call like the toe. This is 10 millimeter foam cut out in the shape. The front is beveled outwards. And then this piece of 1 millimeter foam here gets glued on the top of that. You can kind of see on that orange foot in the top right corner. So that goes on there. This piece goes on top of the toe piece, and it's a 10 millimeter piece and a 5 millimeter piece glued together. So I pre-glue those, and while I'm waiting for the glue to dry, I start working on the back of like the heel piece here. So again, these are 10 millimeter foam for the very back of the heel. The bigger part of the heel is two 10 millimeter pieces of foam glued together. And so now this glue is dry here, so we can cut these out. So that gets a bevel cut in the back, inward bevel. Then you can cut this center piece out. So those will go like that. This back piece here gets a outward cut on the front. And what I'm doing here now is drawing the actual shape that needs to be. So I cut that from the side. So it's not a complete 20 millimeter foam piece. It's kind of angled. So I just kind of draw that on the side and cut that out. And there's like the front. So now using some 10 millimeter foam in that same tube I've been using, cut out a couple chunks of foam here, just some circles. Now with some scrap floor mat foam, I cut out like 3 rectangle pieces, and what I'll end up doing with those is shaping those into tubes. This is a little piece of what the foam, and I draw that template on there, and then I glue 2 pieces of 1 millimeter foam on top just for some little detail panels. So now I can go through and sand everything smooth, and also I cut out like 3 rectangle pieces, and then I glue 2 pieces of 1 millimeter foam on top just for some little detail panels. So now I can go through and sand everything smooth, and also I cut out like 3 rectangle pieces, and then I glue 2 pieces of 1 millimeter foam on top just for some little detail panels. So now I can go through and sand everything smooth, and also I This takes a pretty steady hand to do this technique here. What I'm doing is I'm sanding like a groove, a circular groove in the where these tubes are gonna go. They're supposed to be like hinges. So this rectangle scrap foam here, I just start sanding the corners down until they're smooth cylinder tubes all the way around. And they'll never be perfect, but you're not gonna be looking at them. They're gonna be mostly covered up. So here I kind of give you the example of all the pieces. So that's the back. That's the back part. That's like the heel piece. And that is the front piece there. So the back part here gets this little 1mm foam detail piece on top. And the front of that, I glue this little tube in, making sure that it sticks out the same length on both sides. And then I just use my bench and just glue the front piece on straight. And now this goes on the very bottom. And then these circular pieces here, they go up here on the top. And they probably stick out like maybe 2mm past the side. So now for the very front detail part of this heel piece here, I just cut out some foam and just glue that in place with some super glue. It wraps from that hinge down to the bottom of like the toe part. Using that bullet stone again, I do the same type of shape that we did on the front, or we did on the knee part there. So the front gets glued on like that. I kind of was using the other foot as a reference. And now the very back of this heel piece here gets that little detail on the hinge part. So now this is the piece that will connect the heel to the actual leg. It's almost like an Achilles tendon type thing. So it gets cut out. I cut a bevel in it so it sits at that angle. And there's two little pieces of what the foam here. And again, I'm using that same tube. And I wrap the top of it with 1mm foam to make it thicker, so it looks like a piston. And that gets glued into place on the leg. And then these two little what the foam parts get glued next to it. And then I kind of round that piece off, and that gets glued underneath that stuff there. And then this tube, I pre-mark like a hole where I want the tube to go. So then that tube will sit inside that hole, and those two circular ankle pieces will connect to the side of that chunk in the middle there. So to glue the front on, kind of pre-mark where I need the glue. And you might need to trim up that other side there so it matches the circular line in the back and the inside of the leg. And so that is it. That is two of the feet together. Now, mine are not perfect. They one came out better than the other. But again, you're not going to be staring at them. You're not going to be comparing them. So now here's a trick I learned. I used this gold marker here and drew it on the bevel of the body line, and then I stuck the leg on to the body where it needs to be, and it gave me a mark of the angle. So then I cut out these pieces of 10mm foam with a bevel, 45-degree bevel, so that it'll sit flushly against the body, because the body is flat and then it bevels outward and then it's flat again. So I glue these in place. And I end up regretting that decision because when it came to painting, it was a pain. And I got the whole thing painted, just, fine. I struggled through it. And then when I went to weather it is when I got really irritated, and I ended up taking the legs off and weathering them, and then I just glued everything back together. The other thing I tried to do is I tried to add these earth magnets to the knee part, and it looked really cool and it worked really well. The only problem is that the upper body and the head would be so heavy that it wouldn't be able to stand on its own. It would just keep flopping down, I think. So there's got to be a way to kind of adjust that and make that work if you really wanted to. I just kind of got sick of working on it. So that is it. I ended up just gluing the legs together, the ankles together, and that is it for the legs. And I will see you guys next week. We're going to paint it and weather it. So that will be pretty sweet, and BD-1 will be done. Alright guys, I'll see you next time.